So I'm a big fan of Limehouse Golem. I think that what it manages to do is to take a very, very tricky source and make it theatrical and cinematic in a way that utterly works. So as we said before, the story is that essentially Bill Nighy's character, who is this Detective Inspector John Kildare, is brought in as the fall guy. There is a series of grisly murders happening in the 1880s in London, and they can't solve them. So they think what they'll do is they'll get him in because he will take the fall when the murders are unsolvable, because he is somebody whose position has not been advanced because of, as Daniel Mays was saying, rumours about his sexuality, the phrase, not the marrying kind. He then very quickly figures out that there is a link between these murders and the Ratcliffe Highway case about which De Quincey wrote. He, as Daniel Mays was saying, narrows it down to 4 possible suspects in the reading room of the British Library, which is, Karl Marx, George Gissing, Dan Leno, and John Cree. John Cree being the playwright whose wife is now on trial for allegedly poisoning her husband. And what the film manages to do is to take these sort of various threads, keep them all, up in the air, intertwine them by essentially having the killer's version of events imagined read by various of the different characters, suggesting that any single one of them may be the killer, or may be implicit in the crimes, or may be connected in these crimes which seem completely disconnected. You quite rightly said that it's a film which has, it has an amount of gore and splatter in it, and it absolutely does. But what it does is it all pivots on being between the theatre and the street. I mean, the way in which the look of the film works is there's the warmth of the theatre, there's the misty strangeness of the streets, there is the cold, sort of drained colours of the courtroom scenes. And in the film, essentially, all the world's a stage, and all the world is a blood-splattered stage. And what that means is that even the more gory elements all play out as if they are some kind of grand guignol, some kind of sort of gothic performance. In fact, the killer writes about their murders as being, some form of staged performance. And the film flits between what's on stage and what's in the streets, what's real, what's imagined, what's recorded, and what is just sort of hypothesized. And all the way through it, it manages to keep this very playful relationship between these different stories, between fact and fiction, between real characters and imagined characters. And it plays with stories that people will know that are connected, for example, to the Ripper mythology. It plays with, you were talking about whether or not it's a fair representation of the music hall. And there's a wonderful sequence in which Olivia Cook, who is so great in the film, gets to sing, what did she know about railways? And it is that strange mixture of bawdy, but also bloody, of, populist entertainment. At one point, there is an inscription on a wall which says, that he who fails to prevent the bloodshed, he who observes the bloodshed is every bit as guilty as he who wields the blow. And the film is about spectatorship. It's about the way in which the audience sort of turn up for this ghoulish delight. At one point, there's a crime scene which is overrun by members of the public. And Nighy's character says, what are they doing here? And Daniel Mays' character says, well, it's cheaper than a ticket to the Shocker. It's so that whole thing about theatre and real life intertwining works really well. I think the performances are great. It's a really, really good ensemble cast. Danny Mays mentioned Eddie Marzan, who has got a particularly striking role, which goes from one particular kind of character into something very, very different. As he said, also the plot pivots on a series of twists, and Daniel Mays was quite right in not revealing any of those twists, although I think it's fair to say that if you're watching the film and reading the film attentively, you can see where it's going. In fact, I spoke to one person who said, well, my problem was I could see from the beginning what the end point was going to be. And I said, but that's the great joy of it. Like any great mystery, when the mystery is finally revealed, it makes sense. You go, yes, that absolutely makes sense. It's not one of those Agatha Christie things when there's 20 people and at the end they pull out somebody who you thought had fallen off the train 48 pages ago. The whole thing ties up. It begins with this declaration, let us begin, dear friends, at the end. So we start at the end and we go back to the beginning, and and everything sort of cycles around on itself. I really enjoyed it. I've seen it a couple of times now, and as I said, we're showing it in Shetland tomorrow with a Q&A with Bill Nighy, and I'm looking forward to seeing it again. It is a really sort of ripe and enjoyable murder mystery that plays with the idea of theatre, plays with the idea of legend, plays with the idea of mythology, plays with the idea of acting, the idea that everyone's acting a role, that somehow these crimes they're described as pure pantomime, that all those things are brought together in this melting pot. I mean, I'm a fan of horror movies. I'm a fan of the idea of the theatre and the Grand Guignol anyway, and so in a way it was kind of tailor made for me to like. But when you consider that the project's been through so many different hands, at one point Merchant Ivory were interested in it, Terry Gilliam was interested in it, Neil Jordan was interested in it, and you look at what we've ended up with, and I think that they really do it proud. I think it's a really, really good film.